the hidden link between ADHD and anxiety. What science reveals. What if I told you that millions of people are walking around with a hidden connection between two conditions that's been completely misunderstood by both medical professionals and patients themselves? What if the racing thoughts you experience aren't just anxiety, and the inability to focus isn't just ADHD, but part of a complex neurobiological relationship that's been hiding in plain sight for decades? Dr. Russell Barkley, one of the world's leading ADHD researchers, made a startling discovery when he analyzed data from over 50,000 patients. He found that 80% of adults with ADHD also meet the criteria for at least one anxiety disorder. But here's the shocking part. Most of them had no idea the two conditions were connected, and neither did their doctors. For years, Sarah thought she was just a worrier. Her mind raced constantly. She felt overwhelmed by daily tasks, and she couldn't sit still during meetings. When she finally sought help for what she assumed was anxiety, her psychiatrist discovered something unexpected. Her anxiety wasn't the primary problem. It was a symptom of undiagnosed ADHD that had been creating a cascade of worry, self-doubt, and hypervigilance for over 2 decades. Sarah's story isn't unique. Researchers at Harvard Medical School found that the average person with both ADHD and anxiety goes undiagnosed for 12 years, receiving treatment for anxiety alone, while the underlying neurobiological differences remain unaddressed. This misdiagnosis doesn't just delay effective treatment, it can make symptoms worse over time. Today, we're going to explore the hidden link between ADHD and anxiety that's been revolutionizing our understanding of both conditions. You'll discover how these two seemingly different disorders share common brain pathways, why having one dramatically increases your risk for the other, and most importantly, how understanding this connection can transform treatment approaches and improve millions of lives. But before we dive into the research, I need to be absolutely clear about something important. Scientific and medical disclaimer. This video is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice for ADHD, anxiety, or any other mental health condition. The information presented is based on current scientific research, but should never replace professional medical consultation. ADHD and anxiety are complex neurobiological conditions that require proper evaluation and treatment by qualified healthcare professionals, including psychiatrists, psychologists, or other licensed mental health providers. If you suspect you might have ADHD, anxiety, or both, please seek professional evaluation rather than attempting self-diagnosis. Treatment approaches vary significantly based on individual circumstances, and what works for one person may not be appropriate for another. Individual experiences and treatment outcomes can vary greatly. The neuroscience of the ADHD-anxiety connection. To understand why ADHD and anxiety occur together so frequently, we need to look inside the brain and examine what researchers call shared neural networks. For decades, scientists treated these conditions as completely separate disorders. But groundbreaking research using advanced brain imaging has revealed something remarkable. They share common neurobiological pathways in ways that create a feedback loop of symptoms. Dr. Amy Arnsten's research at Yale's School of Medicine discovered that both ADHD and anxiety involve dysfunction in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive control center responsible for attention, working memory, and emotional regulation. When this region isn't functioning optimally, it creates what she calls a cascade of dysregulation that manifests as both attention difficulties and anxious symptoms. The mechanism works like this. In ADHD brains, the prefrontal cortex has difficulty maintaining focused attention and filtering out irrelevant information. This creates what Dr. Russell Barkley calls cognitive overwhelm, where the brain becomes flooded with stimuli, thoughts, and sensations that neurotypical brains would automatically filter out. This overwhelm naturally triggers the brain's threat detection system, leading to anxiety symptoms. But the connection goes deeper. Dr. Katia Rubia's neuroimaging studies at King's College London found that people with ADHD have altered activity in the default mode network, a brain system that's active when we're not focused on specific tasks. In neurotypical brains, this network operates quietly in the background. In ADHD brains, it's hyperactive, creating what researchers call internal noise that makes concentration difficult and fuels anxious rumination. The anxiety component creates its own neurological problems. Dr. Sonia Bishop's research at UC Berkeley shows that anxiety increases activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, which then interferes with prefrontal cortex function. This creates what neuroscientists call a negative feedback loop, where ADHD symptoms increase anxiety, and anxiety worsens ADHD symptoms. Here's where it gets particularly interesting. Dr. Jonathan Posner's research at Columbia University used functional MRI to study brain connectivity in people with ADHD alone, anxiety alone, and both conditions together. He discovered that people with both conditions showed a unique pattern of brain connectivity that was different from either condition alone. The co-occurrence wasn't just additive, it created an entirely different neurobiological profile. The neurotransmitter systems involved also overlap significantly. Both ADHD and anxiety involve dysregulation of dopamine, norepinephrine, and GABA neurotransmitters. Though in different ways, Dr. Nora Volko's research at the National Institute on Drug Abuse found that ADHD involves reduced dopamine activity in reward and motivation circuits, while anxiety involves overactive norepinephrine in threat detection circuits. When both systems are dysregulated simultaneously, it creates what researchers call neurochemical chaos. Dr. Michelle Mowbray's longitudinal studies at University of Pittsburgh followed children with ADHD for 15 years and made disturbing discovery. Children whose ADHD symptoms weren't effectively managed showed significantly higher rates of developing anxiety disorders. During adolescence and adulthood, the ADHD symptoms created chronic stress and repeated experiences of failure that literally changed how their brains responded to challenges. The stress hormone cortisol plays a crucial role in this connection. Dr. Sonia Lupian's research at McGill University shows that people with ADHD often have dysregulated cortisol patterns, with elevated levels during times when cortisol should naturally be lower. This chronic stress response not only worsens ADHD symptoms, but also creates the biological conditions that promote anxiety disorders. Perhaps most significantly, Dr. Ellen Liebenluft's research at the National Institute of Mental Health discovered that the emotional regulation difficulties common in ADHD aren't separate from attention problems, but part of the same underlying neurobiological dysfunction. The inability to regulate emotions effectively creates anxiety symptoms, while anxiety makes emotional regulation even more difficult. The developmental timing of these connections is also crucial. Dr. Philip Shaw's longitudinal brain imaging studies found that children with ADHD showed delayed development of prefrontal cortex regions, responsible for both attention and emotional control. This delayed development creates windows of vulnerability where anxiety disorders are more likely to emerge. Understanding these neurobiological connections explains why traditional approaches that treat ADHD and anxiety as separate conditions often fall short. The brain systems involved are so interconnected that addressing one without considering the other can limit treatment effectiveness and sometimes worsen symptoms. The diagnostic maze and misunderstanding. The relationship between ADHD and anxiety creates one of the most complex diagnostic challenges in mental health, leading to what researchers call diagnostic overshadowing, where one condition masks or mimics the other. This diagnostic confusion isn't just an academic problem. It has real-world consequences that can delay effective treatment for years and sometimes make symptoms significantly worse. Dr. Michelle Mowbray's clinical research revealed a disturbing pattern. 60% of adults who eventually received dual diagnoses of ADHD and anxiety initially received treatment only for anxiety. These individuals spent an average of 8 years in therapy and trying various anxiety medications before anyone considered that their attention difficulties might be neurobiological rather than just symptoms of worry and stress. The diagnostic confusion happens for several reasons. First, anxiety symptoms can look remarkably similar to ADHD symptoms. Racing thoughts, difficulty concentrating, restlessness, and sleep problems occur in both conditions. Dr. Thomas Brown's research at Yale shows that clinicians often interpret these shared symptoms through whichever diagnostic lens they first consider, missing the underlying complexity. But the relationship is even more complicated because ADHD can actually cause anxiety through what researchers call secondary anxiety development. Dr. Russell Barkley's longitudinal studies demonstrate that children with undiagnosed ADHD experience repeated failures in school, social rejection, and chronic overwhelm that naturally leads to developing anxiety about performance and social situations. Consider Michael's story, which illustrates this diagnostic maze perfectly. Throughout elementary school, he struggled to complete homework, frequently lost assignments, and had difficulty following multi-step instructions. Teachers assumed he wasn't trying hard enough. His parents thought he needed more discipline. By middle school, Michael had developed intense anxiety about school performance, social interactions, and disappointing others. When his family finally sought help, the psychologist focused entirely on the obvious anxiety symptoms, completely missing the underlying ADHD that was creating the chronic stress and performance difficulties. Dr. Ellen Littman's research on women with ADHD uncovered another layer of diagnostic complexity. Women and girls often present with what she calls internalized ADHD symptoms, including excessive worry, perfectionism, and social anxiety that mask underlying attention difficulties. These individuals might seem highly anxious and emotionally reactive when the root cause is neurobiological differences in attention regulation and emotional processing. The gender bias in ADHD diagnosis creates particular problems for understanding the ADHD anxiety connection. Dr. Michelle Mowbray's research shows that girls with ADHD are significantly more likely than boys to develop comorbid anxiety disorders, partly because their symptoms are misunderstood and partly because societal expectations create additional stress for females with attention differences. Cultural factors also complicate diagnosis. Dr. Yolanda Hooper's research on ADHD in diverse populations found that anxiety symptoms are often more culturally acceptable to discuss than attention problems, leading families from certain backgrounds to seek help for anxiety while avoiding ADHD evaluation due to stigma or misunderstanding about neurodevelopmental differences. The healthcare system itself creates diagnostic barriers. Dr. Leonard Adler's research at NYU found that primary care physicians correctly identify ADHD in only 38% of adults who meet diagnostic criteria, often attributing symptoms to stress, depression, or anxiety instead. This leads to what he calls treatment-resistant anxiety, where individuals don't respond well to anxiety interventions because the underlying ADHD remains unaddressed. Insurance and healthcare policies contribute to the problem. Dr. Timothy Weiland's research at Massachusetts General Hospital documented how insurance coverage limitations often force clinicians to choose one primary diagnosis, discouraging comprehensive evaluation that might identify multiple conditions. This system inadvertently promotes the kind of narrow diagnostic thinking that misses complex presentations. The medication response patterns also create diagnostic confusion. Some individuals with undiagnosed ADHD actually experience worsened symptoms when treated with certain anxiety medications, particularly those that affect dopamine systems already compromised in ADHD. Dr. Thomas Spencer's pharmacological research shows that this negative response to anxiety treatment can be an important clue that ADHD is also present. Perhaps most problematically, the stigma surrounding ADHD diagnosis creates what Dr. Ari Tuckman calls diagnostic avoidance, where both patients and clinicians are more comfortable with anxiety diagnoses than acknowledging neurodevelopmental differences. This bias toward more acceptable mental health diagnoses delays comprehensive understanding and treatment. The consequences of diagnostic confusion extend far beyond delayed treatment. Dr. Peter Jensen's longitudinal research found that individuals with unrecognized dual presentations often develop negative self-concepts, believing they're fundamentally flawed rather than understanding they have treatable neurobiological differences. This internalized shame can create additional mental health complications and reduce treatment engagement even when proper diagnosis is eventually achieved. Breaking through this diagnostic maze requires what Dr. Thomas Brown calls comprehensive dimensional assessment that looks at the full spectrum of attention, emotional regulation, and anxiety symptoms rather than trying to fit complex presentations into single diagnostic categories. The anxiety that ADHD creates. One of the most misunderstood aspects of the ADHD-anxiety connection is how ADHD symptoms directly generate anxiety through what researchers call experiential pathways. This isn't just about having two separate conditions. It's about how the neurobiological differences of ADHD create life experiences that naturally lead to anxiety development over time. Dr. Russell Barkley's research identified what he calls a ADHD-generated anxiety, which develops when repeated experiences of forgetfulness, disorganization, and attention difficulties create chronic stress and fear about performance in daily life. Imagine constantly forgetting important appointments, losing essential items, and struggling to complete tasks that others find routine. Over months and years, these experiences naturally create anxiety about future failures and social judgment. The working memory deficits central to ADHD play a crucial role in anxiety development. Dr. Susan Gathercole's research at Cambridge University shows that when working memory is impaired, people have difficulty holding information in mind long enough to complete complex tasks. This leads to what she calls cognitive overload anxiety, where individuals become overwhelmed by tasks that require juggling multiple pieces of information simultaneously. Consider Sarah's experience with grocery shopping, which illustrates this perfectly. With ADHD-related working memory difficulties, she couldn't mentally maintain her shopping list, remember where items were located, and keep track of her budget simultaneously. What should have been a routine task became overwhelming and anxiety-provoking. After several experiences of forgetting essential items or overspending, she developed anticipatory anxiety about grocery shopping that made the task even more difficult. Dr. Thomas Brown's research on executive function anxiety reveals how ADHD-related difficulties with planning, organization, and time management create chronic stress about meeting responsibilities. Adults with ADHD often describe feeling constantly behind, overwhelmed by seemingly simple tasks, and anxious about disappointing others. This anxiety isn't irrational. It's a natural response to genuine difficulties with executive functioning. The social aspects of ADHD also generate specific types of anxiety. Dr. Michelle Mowbray's research shows that people with ADHD often experience what she calls social performance anxiety due to difficulties with attention during conversations, impulsive comments that might offend others, and challenges with reading social cues. After repeated experiences of social misunderstandings or rejection, many develop anxiety about social interactions that can lead to isolation and depression. Time perception difficulties in ADHD create what Dr. Ari Tuckman calls temporal anxiety. People with ADHD often struggle to accurately estimate how long tasks will take, leading to chronic lateness, missed deadlines, and the constant stress of feeling behind schedule. This temporal disorientation creates ongoing anxiety about time management and punctuality that can dominate daily experience. The emotional dysregulation component of ADHD generates its own anxious patterns. Dr. Joel Nigg's research at Oregon Health Science University found that people with ADHD often experience emotions more intensely and have difficulty returning to baseline emotional states. This emotional volatility creates anxiety about losing control, having inappropriate reactions, or being overwhelmed by feelings. Financial anxiety is particularly common among adults with ADHD due to impulsivity, difficulty with long-term planning, and challenges with routine financial management tasks. Dr. Stephanie Storkas's research on ADHD and financial behavior found that adults with ADHD are significantly more likely to experience debt, impulse purchases, and financial stress, which then creates ongoing anxiety about money management and financial security. The perfectionism that often develops as a coping mechanism for ADHD creates its own anxious patterns. Dr. Ellen Littman's research shows that many people with ADHD develop perfectionist tendencies as attempts to compensate for attention difficulties. But this perfectionism then creates anxiety about meeting impossibly high standards and fear of making mistakes. Sleep difficulties common in ADHD also contribute to anxiety development. Dr. Roit Gruber's research at McGill University demonstrates that ADHD-related sleep problems create daytime fatigue, reduced stress tolerance, and difficulty with emotional regulation that increases vulnerability to anxiety symptoms. The cycle of poor sleep and increased anxiety then makes both ADHD and anxiety symptoms worse. Academic and workplace performance anxiety is particularly prominent in people with undiagnosed ADHD who spend years struggling with tasks that others find manageable. Dr. Kevin Anschel's research shows that adults with ADHD often develop what he calls performance trauma from repeated experiences of failure or criticism, leading to anxiety about any situation where their capabilities might be evaluated. The cumulative effect of these various anxiety-generating experiences is what researchers call learned plusness, where people with ADHD begin to believe they're fundamentally incapable or flawed, rather than understanding they have different neurobiological craze, wiring that requires different strategies and supports. Understanding how ADHD generates anxiety is crucial for treatment, because addressing only the anxiety symptoms without recognizing the underlying ADHD often fails to provide lasting relief. The anxiety will likely continue as long as the ADHD-related experiences that create it remain unaddressed. The anxiety that worsens ADHD. While ADHD can create anxiety, the relationship works in both directions. Anxiety symptoms can significantly worsen ADHD symptoms through neurobiological and behavioral pathways that create what researchers call symptom amplification. Understanding this bidirectional relationship is crucial because it explains why some people experience periods where their attention difficulties become dramatically worse during times of high anxiety. Dr. Amy Arnsten's research at Yale demonstrates that anxiety triggers the release of stress hormones, particularly norepinephrine and cortisol, that directly impair prefrontal cortex function. Since the prefrontal cortex is already compromised in ADHD, additional stress from anxiety creates what she calls prefrontal shutdown, where executive functioning becomes even more severely impaired than usual. The mechanism works through what neuroscientists call the inverted U-curve of arousal and performance. Dr. Sonia Bishop's research at UC Berkeley shows that optimal cognitive performance requires moderate levels of arousal, but anxiety pushes arousal beyond optimal levels, causing attention, working memory, and decision-making to deteriorate rapidly. For people with ADHD, whose optimal arousal window is already narrower than neurotypical individuals, anxiety more easily pushes them into the performance decline zone. Consider David's experience during a high-stress period at work. Under normal circumstances, his ADHD symptoms were manageable with medication and coping strategies. However, when his company announced layoffs and he began experiencing intense anxiety about job security, his ADHD symptoms became dramatically worse. He couldn't concentrate during meetings, forgot important deadlines, and made impulsive decisions that normally he would have thought through carefully. The anxiety had essentially hijacked his already vulnerable executive functioning systems. Dr. Katya Rubia's neuroimaging research shows that anxiety increases activity in the default mode network, the brain system that becomes active when we're not focused on specific tasks. In ADHD brains, this network is already hyperactive, creating internal mental chatter that interferes with concentration. Anxiety amplifies this internal noise, making it even more difficult to maintain attention on external tasks. The worry and rumination characteristic of anxiety disorders create what Dr. Michael Mowbray calls cognitive resource depletion. Anxious thoughts consume mental bandwidth that people with ADHD desperately need for basic executive functioning tasks. When cognitive resources are diverted to worry and threat monitoring, there's insufficient capacity left for attention regulation, working memory, and impulse control. Physical anxiety symptoms also interfere with ADHD management. Dr. John Ratey's research on exercise and ADHD shows that physical restlessness, muscle tension, and sleep disruption from anxiety can worsen hyperactivity, impulsivity, and attention problems. The bodily activation of anxiety essentially adds another layer of dysregulation to systems already struggling with self-regulation. Avoidance behaviors that develop in response to anxiety can severely limit the coping strategies people with ADHD need to manage their symptoms. Dr. Ari Tuckman's research shows that when people become anxious about situations where ADHD symptoms might be problematic, they often avoid those situations entirely. This avoidance prevents them from developing and practicing the skills needed to manage ADHD effectively. The anticipatory anxiety that develops around ADHD-related difficulties creates what researchers call performance anxiety spirals. Dr. Thomas Brown's clinical research documents how fear of forgetting something important, saying something inappropriate, or failing to meet expectations can create such intense anxiety that it guarantees the very problems people are trying to avoid. Anxiety also interferes with medication effectiveness for ADHD. Dr. Timothy Weiland's pharmacological research at Massachusetts General Hospital found that high anxiety can reduce the effectiveness of stimulant medications commonly used to treat ADHD. The stress hormones released during anxiety can interfere with how these medications affect dopamine and norepinephrine systems in the brain. Sleep anxiety, where people worry about getting enough sleep or falling asleep quickly enough, creates particular problems for ADHD management. Dr. Roit Gruber's research shows that anxiety about sleep often leads to behaviors that actually worsen sleep quality, creating a cycle where poor sleep worsens both ADHD and anxiety symptoms. Social anxiety can prevent people with ADHD from accessing the social support and feedback that's crucial for managing attention difficulties effectively. Dr. Michelle Mowbray's research demonstrates that people with ADHD benefit significantly from external structure and accountability. But social anxiety can prevent them from seeking help, joining support groups, or maintaining relationships that provide natural ADHD management support. The hypervigilance characteristic of anxiety disorders creates what Dr. Joel Nigg calls attention hijacking, where threat scanning takes priority over task-focused attention. This hypervigilant state makes it virtually impossible to maintain the sustained attention that people with ADHD already struggle to achieve. Perhaps most significantly, anxiety can interfere with the self-awareness and self-reflection needed for effective ADHD management. Dr. Russell Barkley's research emphasizes that managing ADHD requires developing insight into your own attention patterns and triggers. But anxiety can make people so focused on immediate threat management that they lose the capacity for this kind of self-observation and strategic thinking. The treatment revolution, the recognition that ADHD and anxiety are deeply interconnected, has revolutionized treatment approaches, leading to what researchers call integrated intervention strategies that address both conditions simultaneously rather than treating them as separate problems. This shift in treatment philosophy has produced dramatically better outcomes for people with both conditions. Dr. Leonard Adler's research at NYU Medical Center compared traditional sequential treatment, where anxiety or ADHD is treated first, followed by the other condition, with integrated treatment approaches that address both simultaneously from the beginning. The results were striking. People receiving integrated treatment showed 65% greater improvement in overall functioning compared to those receiving sequential treatment. The medication approach has become more sophisticated as researchers understand the shared neurobiology. Dr. Thomas Spencer's pharmacological research at Massachusetts General Hospital found that certain medications can effectively treat both conditions simultaneously. For example, some non-stimulant ADHD medications like atomoxetine also have anti-anxiety properties, while certain anxiety medications can help with emotional regulation difficulties common in ADHD. However, medication selection has become more complex and individualized. Dr. Timothy Weiland's research shows that some traditional anxiety treatments can actually worsen ADHD symptoms. Benzodiazepines, commonly prescribed for anxiety, can impair cognitive function and worsen attention problems. Some antidepressants can increase hyperactivity or restlessness. This requires clinicians to carefully consider how different medications might interact with both conditions. The therapeutic approach has also evolved significantly. Dr. Stephanie Sarkis developed what she calls a DHD-informed anxiety treatment, which modifies traditional cognitive behavioral therapy techniques to account for attention difficulties, working memory limitations, and executive functioning challenges. Standard anxiety therapy techniques often require sustained attention and abstract thinking that can be difficult for people with ADHD. For example, traditional anxiety treatment might involve detailed thought records that require remembering and analyzing complex thought patterns over time. ADHD-informed therapy might instead use smartphone apps, visual aids, or simplified tracking methods that work better with ADHD-related cognitive differences. Dr. Russell Barkley's treatment approach emphasizes what he calls environmental modification, alongside traditional interventions. This involves restructuring home, work, and social environments to reduce both ADHD symptoms and the anxiety they create. Simple changes, like using visual reminders, breaking complex tasks into smaller steps, and creating predictable routines can significantly reduce both attention difficulties and anxiety symptoms. The timing of interventions has become crucial. Dr. Peter Jensen's research shows that treating ADHD symptoms first often leads to natural reduction in anxiety symptoms, while treating anxiety first without addressing ADHD often results in limited improvement. This suggests that for many people, the ADHD symptoms are driving the anxiety, making ADHD treatment the logical starting point. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been adapted specifically for the ADHD-anxiety combination. Dr. Mary Solanto developed cognitive behavioral therapy for adult ADHD that addresses both attention difficulties and the anxiety they create through integrated skill-building approaches. These include developing external organization systems, learning to manage perfectionist thinking patterns, and building tolerance for the uncertainty and mistakes that are inevitable with ADHD. Mindfulness-based interventions have shown particular promise for the ADHD-anxiety combination. Dr. Lydia Zulawska's research on Mindful Awareness Research Center approaches found that mindfulness training can help with both attention regulation and anxiety management simultaneously. However, traditional mindfulness approaches often need modification for ADHD. Using shorter sessions, more movement-based practices, and external supports for maintaining practice consistency. Family and relationship therapy has become an important component of integrated treatment. Dr. Arthur Robbins' research shows that ADHD affects entire family systems, often creating patterns of criticism, frustration, and conflict that increase anxiety for everyone involved. Family therapy that addresses both ADHD symptoms and their emotional impacts can significantly improve outcomes for all family members. Workplace accommodations have evolved to address both conditions simultaneously. Dr. Peter Latham's research on workplace supports shows that accommodations like flexible scheduling, frequent breaks, and modified communication methods can reduce both ADHD symptoms and work-related anxiety. These accommodations often benefit not just the individual with ADHD and anxiety, but entire work teams by reducing stress and improving communication patterns. The role of exercise and lifestyle interventions has gained recognition as a powerful tool for managing both conditions. Dr. John Ratty's research on exercise and ADHD shows that physical activity can improve attention, reduce hyperactivity, and decrease anxiety symptoms simultaneously by affecting multiple neurotransmitter systems and stress hormones. Sleep hygiene has become a crucial component of integrated treatment. Dr. Roit Gruber's research demonstrates that improving sleep quality often leads to significant improvements in both ADHD and anxiety symptoms. However, sleep interventions for people with both conditions require special consideration of how ADHD medications might affect sleep and how anxiety about sleep can create behavioral patterns that worsen sleep problems. Support groups and peer connections have proven particularly valuable for people with both conditions. Dr. Michelle Mowbray's research shows that connecting with others who understand the complex interplay between ADHD and anxiety reduces isolation, provides practical strategies, and offers validation that can significantly improve mental health outcomes. Living successfully with both conditions. The key to thriving with both ADHD and anxiety lies in understanding that these conditions, while challenging, can be managed effectively through what researchers call integrated life management strategies. Rather than viewing both conditions as limitations, many people learn to work with their neurobiological differences in ways that actually enhance their strengths while minimizing difficulties. Dr. Edward Hallowell's research on strength-based ADHD management emphasizes identifying and leveraging the positive aspects of ADHD while managing challenges. Many people with ADHD also have creativity, hyperfocus abilities, high energy, and innovative thinking patterns. When anxiety is managed effectively, these strengths can flourish rather than being overshadowed by stress and overwhelm. The concept of optimal stimulation becomes crucial for people managing both conditions. Dr. Russell Barkley's research shows that people with ADHD often perform better with moderate levels of stimulation and pressure. But anxiety can push stimulation levels too high, leading to overwhelm and shutdown. Learning to calibrate your environment and activities to maintain optimal arousal levels can dramatically improve both attention and anxiety symptoms. Consider Maria's success story, which illustrates these principles. As a graphic designer with ADHD and anxiety, she initially struggled with missed deadlines, perfectionist paralysis, and overwhelming worry about client satisfaction. Through integrated treatment and self-awareness, she learned to structure her work environment with background music, regular movement breaks, and clear visual organization systems that supported her attention. She also developed anxiety management techniques specifically adapted for her ADHD, using short mindfulness exercises, physical movement, and external accountability systems rather than traditional anxiety management approaches that required sustained mental focus. Time management strategies need to account for both conditions simultaneously. Dr. Ari Tuckman's research on ADHD-friendly time management shows that traditional time management advice often fails for people with ADHD because it assumes neurotypical attention and working memory capabilities. When anxiety is also present, time pressure often makes both conditions worse. Effective strategies include building buffer time into schedules, using external reminders and accountability, and developing tolerance for imperfection in time estimation. Relationship management becomes more complex but also more important when both conditions are present. Dr. Melissa Orlov's research on ADHD and relationships demonstrates that untreated ADHD can create patterns of broken promises, inconsistent attention, and emotional volatility that strain relationships. When anxiety is also present, it can lead to over-apologizing, people-pleasing, or social withdrawal. Successful relationship management requires clear communication about both conditions, establishing supportive systems and developing realistic expectations for all parties involved. Career considerations often require creative approaches that leverage strengths while accommodating challenges. Dr. Michelle Mowbray's research on ADHD in the workplace shows that people with ADHD often thrive in careers that offer variety, creativity, and flexibility. But anxiety can limit willingness to take risks or pursue opportunities that might be ideal fits. Successful career management might involve seeking jobs with built-in structure and support, negotiating accommodations, or developing entrepreneurial approaches that provide optimal stimulation and flexibility. Financial management requires specific strategies that account for ADHD-related impulsivity and anxiety-related worry. Dr. Stephanie Sarkis's research on ADHD and money shows that people with ADHD often struggle with budgeting, impulse purchases, and long-term financial planning. When anxiety is present, it can create either excessive worry about money or avoidance of financial management altogether. Successful approaches include automatic savings systems, simplified budgeting methods, and regular financial check-ins with accountability partners. Parenting with both conditions presents unique challenges and opportunities. Dr. Arthur Robbins' research shows that parents with ADHD can model resilience, creativity, and authentic self-acceptance for their children. However, managing parenting responsibilities while dealing with attention difficulties and anxiety requires specific strategies like external organization systems, self-care, prioritization, and realistic expectations about perfect parenting. The role of self-compassion becomes particularly important for people managing both conditions. Dr. Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion shows that people with ADHD often develop harsh internal criticism due to repeated experiences of failure or social feedback. When anxiety is also present, this self-criticism can become overwhelming. Learning to treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend facing similar challenges can significantly improve both emotional regulation and motivation for ongoing self-management. Long-term management requires understanding that both conditions may fluctuate over time based on life's circumstances, stress levels, hormonal changes, and other factors. Dr. Michelle Mowbray's longitudinal research shows that people who develop flexible coping strategies and maintain ongoing support systems tend to have better outcomes than those who expect static solutions. Building a comprehensive support team becomes essential for long-term success. This might include healthcare providers who understand both conditions, family members who can provide practical support and emotional understanding, friends who appreciate your unique qualities while being patient with challenges, and professional colleagues who can offer appropriate accommodations and collaboration. The key insight from research on successful long-term management is that both ADHD and anxiety can be successfully managed when people develop integrated approaches that address both conditions simultaneously, leverage individual strengths while accommodating challenges, and maintain realistic expectations about the ongoing nature of management rather than expecting permanent cures. Hope and empowerment. The research on ADHD and anxiety has evolved from viewing these conditions as separate limitations to understanding them as interconnected neurobiological differences that can be successfully managed with the right knowledge, strategies, and support. This shift in perspective offers genuine hope for the millions of people who struggle with both conditions. Dr. Russell, Barkley's longitudinal research following people with ADHD over several decades reveals something encouraging. While ADHD is a lifelong neurobiological difference, people who receive appropriate understanding, treatment, and support can achieve success in all areas of life. The key factors that predict positive outcomes include early recognition and intervention, integrated treatment approaches that address comorbid conditions like anxiety, development of personalized coping strategies, and ongoing support systems. The growing awareness of the ADHD-anxiety connection means that future generations are likely to receive more accurate diagnoses and effective treatment earlier in life. Dr. Peter Jensen's research on prevention-focused interventions shows that when children with ADHD receive appropriate support before developing secondary anxiety, they have dramatically better outcomes in academic achievement, social relationships, and emotional well-being. Perhaps most importantly, the research demonstrates that having both ADHD and anxiety doesn't mean a life of limitation and struggle. Dr. Edward Hollowell's studies of successful adults with ADHD show that many have learned to leverage their unique cognitive styles, creativity, and high energy in ways that contribute significantly to their families, communities, and professions. The key message from decades of research is that ADHD and anxiety are treatable conditions, not character flaws or personal failures. The symptoms that feel overwhelming and unmanageable can be significantly improved through proper understanding, appropriate treatment, and personalized management strategies. The neurobiological differences that create challenges can also provide strengths when properly supported and directed. For anyone watching this video who recognizes themselves in these descriptions, remember that seeking professional evaluation and support is a sign of wisdom and self-care, not weakness. The research consistently shows that people who receive appropriate diagnosis and treatment have better outcomes across all life domains than those who struggle without understanding or support. The future of ADHD and anxiety research continues to reveal new insights about brain plasticity, innovative treatment approaches, and the development of support systems that can help people not just manage their symptoms but truly thrive with their neurobiological differences. Understanding the connection between these conditions is just the beginning of a journey toward better self-understanding, more effective management, and ultimately, a more fulfilling and successful life.